Well, today we're talking about the age-old sin of jealousy. It's the creepy thing that is associated with the word green.
Yes, and it winds up taking over Saul's life as he begins to obsess about David. So we're going to be reading from 1 Samuel chapter 18 today. It's going to deal with Saul's jealousy. That's what we're talking about on HC Daily.
You're listening to another episode of HC Daily, a daily devotional podcast that you can listen to at home or on the go. We believe that you can grow as much as you want to grow spiritually, and this podcast can be a part of your daily growth plan. So, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify or your favorite podcast app, we're glad you're here. Now, let's join our hosts, Jeff Forrester and Chris Zarbaugh, in the studio.
So, Chris.
Yes.
I was thinking about you, and you have some pretty incredible stories.
Sure.
Right? You've told some really amazing things. I think it's one of the things people love about you is, even at your elderly stage of life, you still are making great stories.
Yeah, I'm playing the back nine.
So I was wondering, when they make a movie of your life, who do you want to play Chris Zarbaugh in the movie?
Have you ever seen Zac Efron in Baywatch? When he was,
No.
When he was, you didn't see that?
I don't watch a lot of Zac Efron movies.
Oh, I do. He's awesome.
I'm sure.
Yeah, he's adorable.
Sure.
I'm just kidding. But when he actually swings over hand to hand, and he has this competition with The Rock, his physique. I actually looked at that and I thought, I didn't even know a guy could have that many muscles. Mm-hmm. And so I think Zac Efron, as long as he looked like that, could play me.
So let me get this right.
Yes.
You were watching a movie that had Zac Efron and the actual Rock.
Yes.
And you would prefer Zac Efron over The Rock to play you in a movie.
100-1.
Wow. That says a lot. That says so much to me, Chris.
Oh.
Speaks volumes.
Listen, I just
No, I get it. I know everything I need to know about that story now. You don't have to say anymore.
Oh, yeah.
All of our listeners know exactly what they need to know from that question.
Zac Efron sings and dances really well.
Exactly. I get it. Hey, I totally
The Rock
get it.
can't even sing. Moana was a joke.
Yeah. The fact that you're arguing Moana is
you're welcome. Come on, man.
I love this question. I was not expecting that kind of answer. So that's fantastic.
You always say that when I answer stuff.
No, that was great. We keep learning. We just keep peeling back the onion every time we ask you a good question. So that makes me very, very happy. So we're going to talk about one of the things that I think you're familiar with as well, working with me all the time. Saul became very jealous of David. I can only imagine how jealous you are of having to work with me on a regular basis. But we're going to just read a few verses this time, so you're going to be happy about that. Let's read 1 Samuel chapter 18. We'll just start off in verse 1 and look at what's going on in Saul and David's life. Mm-hmm. Because Saul is still king, even though David's been anointed. You notice throughout David's story up to this point, he hasn't been going around bragging, I've been anointed to be king. He's really kept it quiet. He hasn't said anything.
Yeah, there's no record at all, or even in hint. Sometimes God will even give us insight sometimes into what people are thinking and feeling. Mm-hmm. There's no record of him even thinking or feeling that.
Yeah, he just was aware that it's going to happen in God's time, right? Mm-hmm. So he's just serving. So it says, after David had finished talking with Saul, he met Jonathan, the king's son. There was an immediate bond between them, for Jonathan loved David. From that day on, Saul kept David with him and wouldn't let him return home. And Jonathan made a solemn pact with David because he loved him as he loved himself. Jonathan sealed the pact by taking off his robe and giving it to David, together with his tunic, sword, bow, and belt. Whatever Saul asked David to do, David did it successfully. So Saul made him a commander over the men of war, an appointment that was welcomed by the people and Saul's officers alike. When the victorious Israelite army was returning home after David had killed the Philistine, women from all the towns of Israel came out to meet King Saul, and they sang and danced for joy with tambourines and cymbals. And this was their song: Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s. This made Saul very angry. What's this? He said. They credit David with 10,000s and me with only with thousands. Next, they'll be making him their king. So from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. The very next day, a tormenting spirit from God overwhelmed Saul, and he began to rave in his house like a madman. David was playing the harp, as he did each day, but Saul had a spear in his hand. and he suddenly hurled it at David, intending to pin him to the wall. But David escaped him twice. So this happened 2 times. Saul was then afraid of David, for the Lord was with David and had turned away from Saul. Finally, Saul sent him away and appointed him commander over 1,000 men, and David faithfully led his troops into battle. David continued to succeed in everything he did, for the Lord was with him. When Saul recognized this, he became even more afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he was so successful at leading his troops into battle.
Yeah, so there it is. And by the way, this story and this theme continues on well past this story.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So Saul hurls a spear at David several times. And you'd think David would learn his lesson, but I guess he is the king.
Yeah.
So whatever he says goes.
Well, that's one of the things that jumps off the page for me is he's sitting there, and it happens at least twice. David escapes from being pinned to the wall by a spear twice. So apparently Saul liked to sit around with his spear in his hand, right? As opposed to, I don't know, this would be like some guy sitting around cleaning his guns all the time or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But suddenly he's got it in his hand. Everybody just thinks it's normal that King Saul would have his spear near him. And then all of a sudden he just loses his mind and fling. And, this is what happens sometimes when people are out of their minds. The Bible says he's acting like a madman here. And he's doing things that when he's sane, because we see other times when he's sane, and he apologizes to David. So it goes back and forth, but this rage would just take over him. And jealousy makes us do all kinds of things that we would never think we would do. So that's it.
Yeah, and so let me just go ahead and say that the obvious thing that jumps off the page to me is that, it's true. What they're singing is true. It says Saul is killed in his thousands, David is killed in his 10,000s. And so there is a definite truth to the fact that David is better in some ways, right? At battle, he's a guy that's more loved. He has more attention of the people, and so that's a reality. And what we see is that Saul just can't handle it.
Right.
And there's sort of a weird dynamic there because we're talking about the Spirit of the Lord leaving Saul because of Saul's sin and everything else that Saul was just a part of, and then of course the Spirit of the Lord coming on David, which means that David's experiencing God's blessings. Saul is experiencing a lack of it. And then there's like this jealousy where I wonder if he didn't just want the fame, but I wonder if he was jealous because he thought to himself, that's how I used to be.
Yeah.
Remember when he, his very first day as king, remember when he chopped up the oxen a couple podcasts ago?
Yeah.
Like maybe he's thinking, man, that's the guy I used to be. That's the guy I want to be.
Right.
I just don't have what it takes.
Yeah. He had it. And he doesn't have it anymore.
Yeah.
And the differentiating thing is where it talks about Saul recognized this and he became even more afraid. And that was that David continued to succeed in everything he did because the Lord was with him. It mentions 2 times in the passage that Saul could see that the Lord was with David.
Yeah.
And so he knew, I don't have that anymore. That's why he's succeeding. So one thing that we passed over is David's friendship with Jonathan.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What a unique thing. 1, how humble is Jonathan? And
right.
2, what an opportunity for David, right? So right there at the very beginning, it talks about how Jonathan, we know if we had taken the time to read some of the other passages, Jonathan had already led the troops a couple of times. He was a seasoned, successful leader. He was the leader of a third of his father's troops. Now, we know a couple things. 1, he had to be at least over 20 years old in order to be in his father's army. That would be part of it. According to the notes here in the Life Transformation Bible, it says Jonathan had to be at least 20 years old to be in his father's army. And the fact that he was already commanding 1/3 of the army and had won 2 great victories indicates that he was a seasoned soldier and, not just an adolescent. But we do know that David was still probably a teenager, late teens. So the age gap probably would have been 20, 25 years probably between these 2 guys. So what you have kind of is a mentor-mentee relationship, and David being the anointed one, and when Jonathan is giving him his clothes and his sword and his belt and what all does he give him there? His bow. He's basically acknowledging you're going to be king, right? Because these are royal robes. This is going to be a royal sword. It's not just going to be the normal guy's stuff. And he was kind of conceding, I think, even there that hey, you're going to be a leader. And the Bible says that they loved each other as close brothers. So
yeah, well, to love somebody as you love yourself is not, we could all identify with that. So the idea that like I would love a member of my family, or even I have a close friend who, you know, he always makes a joke. This is not true, but I'm going to say it because it's funny. He'd say, well, I'd bury a body for you. Right. Well, obviously I'm not going to need that anytime soon. But,
Well, you never know. Don't just flatly say no, thank you. Just keep in the back of your mind that, okay,
Right.
I got the guy.
I
know a guy.
I know a guy. I'll call one of my cousins. So the bottom line is you know, I know what it means to love somebody like I love myself. And so David and Jonathan have this great, you know, friendship and a love for each other. And yeah, Jonathan would be the guy to become king.
Yeah.
So for Jonathan to act this way and for him to treat David this way, you're right. It's just either total humility, or it's maybe Jonathan recognizing what God is already doing.
Yeah.
Or maybe more, you know, who knows? It doesn't say so, but maybe Jonathan didn't want it, but that's probably unlikely.
I think that is probably unlikely. But a couple things. I said that David must have been a teenager. David is leading troops at this point, so he must have been at least 20 as well, right, at this point. But maybe Jonathan could see in David what his dad could see. But Jonathan was a good man, and his dad was a bad man. So a bad man would be threatened by the power of God on somebody else's life. And Jonathan would say, that's a guy I want to support and encourage, right?
Yeah.
So maybe he could see that the power of God was on David's life.
So, hey, I'm going to brag on you. You're going to hate what I'm about to say.
Oh, no.
But I'm going to brag on you. You know, when I left my church and I came over to Heritage, I've been only here for like a year and a half, 2 years, almost 2 years. And I really know very few people. I can't even really identify other than one other person in my whole life who would allow somebody to come in and take like 50% of the stage time, right? So you are the lead pastor of Heritage Church for so long, and you've allowed me to come in here, and you're like, hey man, you allowed me to just shine and be myself and do what God has called me to do. Yeah. And so I brag on you all the time, and I tell people, I'm like, what kind of guy does that?
A lazy guy.
A lazy guy. Oh yeah. You can say,
I'm just exhausted.
You can say what you want.
Actually, I was out in the lobby today complaining to people. They were treating me like I was a guest, right? Guest services people. They were treating me like I was a guest.
They say, welcome to Heritage.
They did. I used to know a guy that looked just like you, right?
That's so funny.
And I was like, man, one of these days they're going to let me preach here again.
I hope. Funny. Yeah. All right, so stop messing up my compliments. So bottom line is I even bragged on you today in the lobby, and I said, what kind of guy does that? It's a guy with, you know, thank God that he's gifted you with self-assurance, so you don't have to worry about that whole throw a spirit me to the wall.
Oh, sure, right.
But at the same time...
Oh, I'll pin you to the wall if I have to.
Right.
Trust me.
Only a different way with your fist. Let me get through the compliment.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So you have self-assurance, and that's a good thing. But it's beyond that. It's an absence of ego, and it's much of humility. And I just want to say, hey man, I'm just thrilled to be here doing this with you. I absolutely love being here. So these old friends of mine, his name is Jerry. He actually said, do you like it here? And I said, when I came over, I says, I knew I'd like it. I said, but I wasn't really sure if I'd love it. I said, but I could honestly say, without hesitation, I love it. I love being here. And you know, I don't know what the future holds, but I don't have any plans to do anything different anytime soon. Yeah. Because I love being here. Anyway, thanks, man.
Oh, that's nice.
That's my bragging on you.
Yeah, I think I got goofy because that's my mechanism for deflecting, you know,
that kind
of stuff.
I know.
No, I love it. One, you know, hey, I really believe in you and what God's doing in your life and the ministry that you've had all these years. And I just always am looking for opportunities to be better. And I feel like we're better together. Yeah. You know, so many similarities. We just found out we like the same Jimmy John's sandwich, for crying out loud.
Yeah, just like 20 minutes ago.
Didn't we?
Yeah.
It's crazy. We're so similar. We might as well be brothers. Yeah. And that's kind of this Jonathan and David story here, which, by the way, I named my sons Jonathan and David, right? Because I wanted them to grow up to be that way. But they just were so close. They were in sync instantly. That's kind of what he's saying here is there was an immediate bond between them. For Jonathan loved David. And they connected on a level that I think is very special. And when you can have that kind of partnership, both guys wound up being better because of it. And I think that's kind of how our relationship is right now. And by the way, yet another way I'm similar to you. I had named my son Stephen out of Acts chapter 7 from Stephen. Right. And so my wife actually, when we were dating, I was like 15 years old, and she had gone back through and found
back when I actually wrote to her and I said, if we ever have a son, I'd like to name him Stephen.
Wow.
I was 15 at the time.
Wow, you're planning on your kids' names when you're 15.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we ended up naming him Stephen.
Yeah.
Kind of cool.
Isn't that cool? Yep. Name him after a Bible story. So anyways, that was a fun conversation. But the reality is what we're seeing is Saul is being destroyed by jealousy.
Yeah.
And so from this passage, what do we see about God? The only thing I really see really significant in this passage, specifically teaching us something about God, is what happens when a person has God's power really in their life. And that should be something we desire. We should desire God's power in our life. And the power of God is available to every Christian through the power of the Holy Spirit and the power of Christ's resurrection, right? So we have that power available. And so now it's just making sure that we're walking in it. And you see that in David's life. He's choosing humility. He's choosing God's way. He's fighting for God's cause. All those things, and God's power is on him. That's what I see in that one. But what do we learn about people? And I think this really is kind of a lesson on lots of different human traits.
Yeah. So I once heard somebody say that the antidote to jealousy is to celebrate.
Yes.
And so if you're jealous of somebody, the way to break out of that is just to even if you don't mean it, celebrate them publicly, celebrate them privately, celebrate them in your heart, and then just do it until you mean it.
Yeah.
And so I just think that the human tendency to be jealous is so unbelievably powerful. And how can a story that's thousands of years old still relate to us today? And the answer is because human tendency is the same. Mm-hmm. And so it's just natural. And I think that one of the best examples, that have been modeled for me is for somebody to say, "Hey, man, I'm gonna train somebody up or raise somebody up, and I hope that they succeed. I hope they do better than me." And I think that that's easy for us to do with our kids, but it's not easy for us to do with somebody who's not our kids.
Right. Coworkers.
Yeah.
Siblings.
Right. But our kids, we're like, man, we want them to be better than we are because they're our kids.
Yeah.
But if we love somebody else like we love ourselves, but unfortunately, obviously that belonged to David and Jonathan, not David and Saul.
Right.
So I would just say human tendency, jealousy is so prevalent.
I think we all have, by the way, there's all a season when we're going to be at our peak. There's going to be a time when we're not. And we see Samuel, we just finished up the Samuel thing. It was Samuel's turn. He didn't feel ready to step back, but it was his time to step back and let Saul take the lead in the civil government stuff. And he humbly did it. So what did we do? The whole life of Samuel, we celebrated him because he was humble enough to not be jealous.
Right.
Right? Who's this young upstart? He doesn't even deserve it. God doesn't even want a king, right? And he could have fought him and caused all kinds of trouble, but instead he humbly let the other take the floor. He celebrated the other. And so we see him all through the rest of Saul's life, still having influence and authority, and into David's life. But then we see Saul, who cannot handle it. Mm-hmm. Saul doesn't even know David's been anointed king yet. He doesn't even know that.
Right. Well, he asked the question. He says, what, next they're going to be calling him king.
Right.
Yeah,
he didn't even know.
Yeah, he's starting to get it, only suspect.
Right.
But he does not know.
Right. And so I think that there's something about choosing not to be jealous, that there's a character component to that. And all I can say is people who tend to be jealous, you're jealous about your friends because their new boat. You're jealous because they get to go on vacations. You're jealous because your sister got this or your brother got that, or you're jealous because a coworker. You are always going to be miserable. There is no story ever in the Bible where a person consumed by jealousy was living a good life.
Oh, yeah. That's a good point.
Right? There's never a time you go, oh, man, that's a hero in the Bible. We should copy him because he's so jealous.
Yeah.
Right?
Let me take a minute to say it's such a great thing to mention in this moment is when you look at social media and you notice the things that other people post, it's easy to be jealous.
Oh, yeah.
Because people post their highlight reel.
Sure. Yeah.
And all you see about your own life is your own blooper reel.
Right.
But there's a couple that went to college with us that lived, in the married dorms, at Baptist Bible College right down the way. And I won't tell you their names, because that would be weird. But their names were Bobby Joe and Terry Majors.
Wow.
But anyway, so Bobby Joe and Terry, they're on Facebook all the time. And they post vacations, like it seems like every fourth week.
Oh, sure, yeah.
They're vacationing. Mm-hmm. And their home's beautiful, and she's successful in her business, and he supports that and everything else. And every time I look, I think, man, like I sort of want their life.
Sure.
And but you know what? It's about 2% of me that says that. 98% of me says good for them, right? And by the way, I don't force myself to say that. I don't struggle at all, but I legitimately celebrate.
Yeah.
Even though I think to myself, that would not be a bad life.
Right. I think that there's something to learn to say good for them. Paul tells us, I know we're not supposed to be cross-referencing, but Paul does say in Romans chapter 12, rejoice with those who rejoice. And it's okay. It's okay. It takes nothing away from me to celebrate that you had a success. Nothing. It doesn't take anything away from me that somebody loves you. It doesn't take anything away from me that somebody thinks that you're great or gives you an opportunity. I can just celebrate with you. Good job. Right? Opportunities are going to come to me too. Negative people tend to create a lot of negativity in their life, and good things don't come to them. Right? But positive people who can encourage and celebrate other people tend to have far more opportunities because they tend to draw positive people to them, and good things wind up happening. So I don't think there's any benefit at all in pursuing negativity or jealousy of somebody else.
Yeah.
Ever.
And let me just go on record and say this. When you can say good for them and mean it, it's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah.
Just personally.
Yeah.
Because it's like, man, I'm just so glad for them. And, good for you, it sounds like an old-fashioned phrase, doesn't it?
Yes.
It sounds like something that somebody would use from the 50s. Good for you. But my wife and I picked it up somewhere along the way. I think it was an old friend of ours, Dwight Durbin, who's older than us. But my wife says it more than I do. But when she says it, she means it with such a pure heart.
Yes. I've heard her say it a bunch of times.
Yes, and she'll say, good for you.
Good for you.
Good for you.
Yeah.
And when she says it, it's just so pure. And I'm just like, man, I just love the fact that she celebrates people.
Yeah. So Avdal Bakhtar and Hope Church, they are the only religious organization that's allowed to set up a booth inside of the Ramadan Eid celebration in Dearborn. All the other Christian organizations are required to be only in the protester areas. But Avdal's church is famous for being a blessing to people. Now, Christianity and Islam are fundamentally incompatible, right? They're not the same message. But Avdal, they set up a booth with a sign that says, rejoice with those who rejoice. God bless you, right? And they pass out candy and they offer New Testaments to people. And they say, congratulations. Because for the Muslims, they're coming out of Ramadan, and then their Eid celebration is a giant carnival, big celebration.
Yeah.
And so Avdal says, I'm not mad at them for having a celebration. Right? Why would I get out and scream at them? You can't lead your enemies to Jesus. You can only lead your friends to Jesus. And so I can choose to celebrate with you when you're celebrating. I don't have to endorse everything you're doing, but I can celebrate with you when you're celebrating instead of being jealous of you.
That's a good application, because that sort of says rejoice with people you not necessarily agree with or get along with.
Right.
Because it's one thing to rejoice with you if you're my friend.
Right.
Because I could be jealous of my friends. But to rejoice with somebody when you fundamentally sort of don't disagree with them, that's a good lesson.
Yeah, so he's not celebrating Ramadan with them.
Right.
He's celebrating a different holiday that's just Ramadan's over. So this isn't honoring Allah. This is just them celebrating a party.
That's
right.
right.
So he's like, I can celebrate your party with you.
That's great.
God bless you.
Well, hey, this is a great way to wrap up, and we'll see you next time as we continue to talk about King David.
There you go.
Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us spread the word by liking this episode and sharing it on your social media platforms. Be sure to leave a comment and review, and don't forget to give us 5 stars. When you do, you help us reach even more people who need a daily devotional like HC Daily. If you'd like to hear more from Chris and Jeff, they're both teaching pastors at Heritage Church, located in Southeast Michigan. You can get more of their messages by clicking on the Messages tab at heritagechurch.com. Be sure to join us again soon for another episode of HC Daily.